thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to those online. Yes, another meetup. We're back again to go again. Thanks to those that have joined. For those that don't know, this is Dr. Greg Lowe, who's been around doing this stuff. I think you taught me my database administrator boot camp 14 years ago.
Could have been.
Something like that. So been around for a while. So Greg's going to take us through the what's new in T-SQL. If you're online or if you're in the room, please feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's make this interactive and chatty as much as we can. I'll monitor the chat as well. But I am attempting to record. The recording last month didn't work. But I am attempting this time to try again. So hopefully I will be able to post this online. But I'll pass over to you.
Good. So listen, what this session's about, I keep finding people who think T-SQL hasn't changed, in quite a long time, and that's just not the case. In fact, there's good reason why people did think that, because there were long periods where there was. It was in the valley, where nothing much was happening. In fact, even back in SQL Server 2014, I remember being in a session and asking about T-SQL enhancements. And I literally had a product group person say to me, "Why would you need any?" They thought T-SQL was done. Okay, interesting concept, but not reality, right? And so we have had a number of things added along the way. But there's been a couple of, I think, quite interesting ones in recent times, and people are just not across it. And they're still using it the same way they've been using it for a very long time. So, look, where I fit in, I'm at SQL Down Under. And so, one who started it in the data platform MVP program for a long time, and part of the Microsoft RD program, which just gets me on. I often describe it gets me on a lot of interesting mailing lists in Microsoft, basically. And part of the master program, and did a lot of writing. But what I do have at the moment is a whole bunch of podcasts, and that's where people learn from. And so the SQL Down Under one's been around a fairly long time, actually. There's good numbers. There's about 40-odd thousand people download those when they come out. And so it's sort of like good sizable numbers. A while back, I started with Cosmos, so that's for Cosmos DB. Then added Fabric for Microsoft Fabric. We've got stuff in there. And lately, PG down under for some Postgres content. Primarily, it's Azure Postgres, stuff and things like that, but not 100%. I've got a lady who does logos for me, and she keeps. I keep trying to get her to use Australian native animals. A bit hard with the elephant of Postgres, so that didn't really work.
I love the echidna.
Yeah, the echidna is cool. Although I had people in the US say to me, "Why did you get a hedgehog?"
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, okay. So yeah,
nose needs to be.
Could be. Yeah. Anyway, they're all out there. And look, what I want to talk about, 4 areas. So there's a bunch of just straight out new things that have happened in recent versions. Some enhancements to things that are already there. A whole lot more JSON love has appeared in recent times. And then lastly, just a slightly odd one, there's bit manipulation appeared in the latest versions as well. And so the first of these is not distinct from. And so this is something I think I've been asking the product group for as long as I've been involved with the product, right? And so what you have is you have situations where you're trying to say, I want these things to be the same, but if they're both null, I want that to be the same too, right? And so on. Like, that's such a common thing. So what it is sort of like an equivalence is what you're after, and so if either is different and so on. So this just returns true or false. And even if one or both are null, this sort of still works. And so the weird thing with it, though, is it's most commonly used with not, because you're normally trying to work out if something's different, not if it's the same most of the time. Anyway, and so let's have a quick look. If you haven't tried version 20 as yet for Management Studio 2, just a little surprise is that there's now a little they've moved the encryption stuff to the front page and so on. So yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to say trust server certificate in this case.
For Data Studio.
Yep.
That's like the latest thing on block, right?
Yeah. So I'll just grab here. Just set up a little bit of data. So I've got some stuff here I can work with. Actually, let me just do this setup. Play nicely. That's good. Okay. So in this scenario here, right now, if I look at, I've got some stock items, and if I just look at those, then what I want you to look at is the color, right? So I've got steel, gray, black, null, white, black, things like that, right? And so if I want to parameterize that in a query, the mistake people make, of course, is this, where they'll say where color is that. And so, I mean, if I do have that and I say it's blue, then yeah, it's all good. I actually get all the blue things coming back. But the thing is, if this is null, then of course, what do I get? I get none, right? And it's because null doesn't equal null. Null equals null returns null, not true or false, right? And so this is why this is important. And so you go, okay, well, what do we do, right? So this is the sort of thing people do. They go, is null color, make it an empty string, compared to the parameter if it is null, or they do dynamic SQL, they do things like that. I mean, that'll work, and give you what you're after there. But what's the issue with this? Any feeling? I mean, the first thing is the execution plan is going to be horrible, right? Because even if we've indexed color, we haven't indexed the outcome of that, right? So that's a problem. But the other sort of problem with this is there's a subtle logical difference as well, right? Is that we can now no longer tell the difference between an empty string and something that's null, right? And that's not necessarily the same thing, right? So the thing is, whatever value you put in the bracket in there suddenly becomes something you can't tell the difference between that and no value at all. Yeah? Might matter, might not matter to you. But if we look at the execution plan for this, and no big surprise here anyway, we just end up with an index scan. Now, any thought why it's an index scan, not a table scan? Any feeling why you get that? And it's simply because we've only asked to return a couple of columns. They both exist in the index. And so SQL Server's decided it's easier to read the whole index than it is to read the whole table, but that's the end of it. It's not really using the index for anything else, except for here's a smaller pool of data that just happens to have the stuff that we need, right? So that's not great. And so a more correct version used to look like this, where we'd say, where color is color, or color is null and at color is null. That was a bit better. And in fact, if you look at a lot of the auto-generate code that Microsoft produces, it often does exactly this, right? And go on, this is kind of cool.
You said that the audio is
this because I started touching things.
Touching things. Okay. So the thing is, so that's actually, so if you tried that in earlier versions, that's not what you would see. Right? And the new option is instead we say where color is not distinct from color. Okay. And so this is saying, if they're null, they're both null. If they're the same value, it's all good, right? And if we look at the execution plan for that, and again, we're back to a nice index seek in this case, and it works exactly as you'd expect. The more common thing is to say, as I said, we've got is distinct from, is not distinct from, and so on. And even if this is null, it just works exactly as you'd expect. Right? And so far, far nicer. Now, what would I really like to have seen? I wish we had an operator for that. Because
triple.
that's that. I mean, we've got all the other little plus equals and things like that. And then I go, is not distinct from, is, and it's nearly always used with not. Yeah, it's a lot of work. I really wish we had like a little equivalence operator or something like that. But anyway, I haven't convinced them of that yet. So now one of the other things that's really interesting is if you execute this in SQL Server 2022, but the query is running across a linked server to another machine and it's not 2022, the question is what on earth happens? And this is what happens. It actually sends where not, color is not color, or color is null and color is null, or color is null and that color is null. So
we need to update it.
Yeah. That's not the most pleasant query you're ever going to run, that one. Yeah, so anyway, that's what it does. Cool. So that's a big tick.
Greg, just when you're saying that's what it does over the link server, does it do that under the covers, or do you need to rewrite?
No, you just write your query like you write it, but if it's querying something where it's passing the query over to the other side, that's what happens. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So it still works, which is kind of what you need. We also got generate series a little while ago. So this is like a function that generates a series of numbers. And the weird thing with this is the parameters, right? So we've got a start value and a stop value. The start has to be a number of some type, except, bit's often considered a number, but we can't play that. The stop value has to be the same data type. So there's no specific data type. It has to be, it could be any one of those, but it has to be the same. And the step can actually be negative, but it can't be zero. Otherwise, you'd have an infinite loop, right?
Great. Just before you jump on, just come back to the previous one, online question of just link servers. Is that the same as external tables?
I wish it was, actually. No, linked servers are where we basically declare a server in our list of server things in an on-premises machine, and we say, when I refer to this name, this is how you connect over to that other machine. That's what's been around in the product. I don't even remember when somebody talked about that today.
At least 08.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would have thought at least, probably even SQL Server 2000 at least, the uplink servers. Yeah.
I'll read that if I remember.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if they were there earlier.
I think it might have been even 6.5.
It could be, yeah.
Well, you're old.
Yeah. And so, I'm a big fan of the stuff with external tables and external data sources and things like that. In fact, it's one of the things that comes up all the time with Azure SQL Database. People say, hey, if I move to that, I can't query something in another database. And you can. I mean, you've just got to declare an external data source and an external table and go off and query it, no problem at all. You can't do like use, and you can't do, 4-part names and things like that. But you sure can create an external table to point across and go and do it. Now, some of the performance of that, it works fine if what you're doing is dragging the data in one direction. It works an absolute charm. When you do that, it's good. And I've been wanting that to appear in the on-premises product, which it has in recent times.
Is distinct work on the external tables?
It would work. Yeah, the only issue with any of these things is where it gets resolved.
It'll work, it might not work quickly.
Yes.
That's what you're trying to tell me.
The query will still run, yeah. Now, the output column of this is called value, and you can get an empty result. So, if the start is less than the stop and you're going backwards with a negative step, then it just returns nothing. If the start is bigger than the stop and you get a positive step, then it's going to return nothing. But as I said, you can't have a zero. And so, look, the thing that's cool with this is we can use it for lots and lots and lots of things. So if we look at a common thing here, your typical thing. So select value from generate series, 1 to 10, that sort of thing. Piece of cake. People have, ever since I've been using SQL Server, people said, I want to have a table of numbers, or I want to have, these sorts of things. It's been something people have wanted. The loop with a step, no surprise, it's like a normal for loop in most languages. So we're going to get 1, add 4, the next one's bigger than 10, so we stop.
It's not 4 is basically the step, right?
Yeah. Now, what is cool with this is that if I said with values to return, then I said, give me 1,000 values here. And then down here, I said, select data from that. Then I said, give me the query plan. The cool thing, just see, but the cardinality estimate is 1,000, right? And there's a world of goodness about that, because most of these sort of functions in the past, it doesn't have a value and it just guesses numbers like 10,000, or something like that, which are often tragic, numbers to be guessing. Where this seems to be able to decipher quite a bit about what's actually going on with that. And of course, data types. So I can't mix them, right? So if I said, give me 0 to 10.1, not going to happen. Right? But if I said from 0.0 to 10.0, going up 0.1, then that'll be fine. That sort of thing's okay. Now, the nice thing with this, of course, is when you then combine it with other functions. So if I said date add a day, give me the value and just give me today's date, and so just give me the next 100 days, this sort of thing becomes really easy to do, where it's just hard to do that stuff. Yeah. Or even here, I said, give me the alphabet, give me 26 letters, this sort of thing. So there's so many things you can do with generate series. It's a world of goodness, all of itself. All right. Then we got a couple of date ones. So date truncation is a thing that I've ended up doing over the years so many times, in different ways, right? So it'll be things like I have a transaction date and I want the date at the beginning of the month. Now we have end of month as a function, but they never gave us beginning of month or start of month. There's ways you can work around that, but what if you wanted to truncate the date to the beginning of a week, or if you, or things like that, and all of a sudden this becomes a lot more interesting. Here's a date and time, and I want it the hour that's part of, and so on and so on and so on. So this is what this does. And so this has become, it's a really common thing in data warehouse population and stuff like that. It does copy the standard abbreviations. I never like using those, but it does take small date time, date time 2, and date time offset. They're the ones. And interestingly, the return type is dynamic. And so what I'm meaning there is that if you use a date time value, it gives you back a date time value. This is wickedly cool because notice that that's a sort of function you can never write yourself. You know what I mean? We can't write a function that, returns a different data type depending upon what the input is, things like that. This is why these things have to be built in. And similarly, they gave us date bucket. And this one's actually really cool too. And so what it does is it returns the starting point of a bucket of date time values. You can use it to do a date truncation. I mean, the same thing would apply. But what you can say is things like, I want to find the day of the week or something like that. Here's the number of days days that I want in each chunk of time. Here's the value I want you to convert. And oh, by the way, if I'm doing, say, weeks, I want you to start on a Wednesday, or something. So you can pass it any Wednesday and it'll go, yep, that's a valid day, right? And so use that for a thing. This is super powerful. And so if you look at this one, so what I've done here, this is the sort of thing I used to have to do. So if I had date time or date time 2 values, and somebody said to me, I want that to the nearest minute or truncated to the minute, what do? It's like ugliness, So what I do before is I'd say, give me date time from parts, get the year, get the month, get the day, get the date part, and of course we got no hour and minute functions, and so on. So then use date part to go and get the hour and minute and so on. And so I could do that, right? That works. But, you know, these things are now drastically simpler. So if I take this date related value and I say, give me the nearest minute, or sorry, down to the minute, the hour, the day, the week, the ISO week, all those things are just sort of part of that. And it's just a piece of cake now. You know, it just goes and does that. You know, so this is that's the minute that it was part of. This one's the hour. You know, that's the day, and so on. It's just beautiful. You know, and there are so many times I've needed to do that. And so if you look at even truncating to a month before, so what I would have to do if I had, say, a bunch of transactions and I wanted to just get the beginning of the month, right? I typically before I would have gone date from parts, the year of the date, the month of the date, one, you know, something like that. I might have gone date add, you know, end of month -1, you know, like things like that. I mean, there's any of these things, there's different ways of doing it, but in the end, this is now like really clean, you know, for doing this type of stuff. It's a good thing. And so it becomes much simpler now. I just say date trunk to the month, and I'll get back the same stuff. And as I said, the output type depends upon the input type coming in. And so do these. And so notice it's actually a data type coming back here. There's no time value and stuff, where most of the other date time functions, you know, tended to return like a date time to value or something nowadays, you know, rather than that, and it doesn't do that. You can't go below the input type, and nanosecond is not supported. So, for example, if I have a date coming in, I can't say, give me the minute. It's going to go, no, you know, not going to happen because it doesn't have minutes, right? But I could also use, you know, date, as I said, date bucket to do truncation. So if I just said to the minute, to the hour, to the day, the week, and so on, you know, that's fine. And so I could do that instead of using the date truncation. ISO week isn't supported for that, and makes sense. It takes a while to stop and think about why that is, but anyway, it's ISO week doesn't work there. But the sort of things that are interesting here is, so if I wanted to say, give me the week, and I want periods of 1 week at a time, I could do 2 or 3 or whatever. Here's the value I want you to work with. And if I pick any Wednesday ever and put it in there, then that's saying use that as the origin, as the extra one. So if I said, look, do this at the moment, I get 12th of the 9th, but if Wednesday was the start, I get 7th of the 9th. So, but this is the sort of thing I run into as well. Which 2-hour period is this value in when hours start at 15 minutes after the hour? You know, it's like, oh.
Yeah, that's something you get asked regularly.
Yeah, I've had that stuff. But again, it just becomes date bucket at 2-hour periods, you know, with a date value that I'm processing, and give me anything, any time that starts at 15 minutes, right? And it's insanely powerful, you know, and so that says the period starting at 12:15 on that day is the thing, you know, is the beginning of that period. I love this. It's good. All right, that's date bucket. There's a couple of approximate things. We've had a few of these in the past where sometimes you don't want the actual value. You're happy to be close to the value, you know? So like you see things where people are, I don't know, counting the number of distinct values in something just because they want to put it up on a display somewhere and keep refreshing it. And you don't really need to have it like to the individual value, you know, when you're doing that sort of thing. They've added a few more of these approximate ones. And so the percentile ones, discrete and continuous ones, have gone in there. And they're really, really fast compared to the normal function for doing this. And they're saying the maximum error is about 1.3%. So it's not like scary bad, but it's like wickedly fast. And they use way less memory and so on. There was also a really nice additional one now is what's called named window functions. And so if you look at the previous logical query order, the way SQL Server processes things, it's kind of like from where's the data coming from? Where does let's filter the rows we're working with, and then we've got a group by, and then we got having to pick out the aggregates we want, then we do the select, then we order by, right? So that's what we've had. And so the thing that breaks that now a bit is select window, and that we now have additional options in over the top of this. Now, so the idea is that a window function lets you petition and order sets of rows, and we've had them for a while, right? So they've been there, and they're powerful types of things they can do. What we can now do is we can give them a name and then reuse them in the queries, right? This is super cool. And you can use multiples of these in a query, and you can refer to one named window in another named window where it further refines it. So let me show you that. So the logical query order ends up as like a window in the middle there. Now, so if we look at named windows here, so in this one here, I've got an existing over clause. So I just say select row number over stock item, and then the rest of the columns from stock items. And that's been there forever, right? And so, well, not forever, but 2008, no, 2005. And so this is just going to give us out, add a row number in over there. Now, what we could do is we can rearrange that thing. Instead of doing it like this, sort of almost syntactic sugar, we can do this instead. So we can say select row number over this, and I could say window called by stock item as just order by stock item. And so I can then apply that over the top of other things. So for example, if I say select invoice ID, I can say I've got here window for invoice ID as petition by invoice ID. And then instead of having to repeat that in all the over clauses, is that cool?
Yes.
Why does this matter, right? Yes.
Yep.
And so the difference is I can now go over for invoice ID and then apply that in the query, and then it just applies that window clause all the way down. That's those.
Sort order rather than every line.
Correct, right? And so then you can redefine it in another one. So I can say for invoice ID as petition by invoice ID, but for invoice ID by stock item ID, I can say as for invoice ID, the previous one, and then but add in order by. Sweet. And then in here, I can then say, use the for invoice ID here, but use the invoice ID by stock item ID up there, and so on. And so this is just really, really nice. So it just lets us give a name to something that could have been a really messy over clause, and then we can use it in another one, and we can redefine them and sort of like nest them. It's pretty cool, actually, as to what that does. And so if you haven't done a lot of work with window clauses, you just start to realize the sort of things that you can actually do with this. It's interesting. And so like here, I've actually got for rolling invoice ID as this one, rows between unbounded preceding and current row. And then up here, I've done petition by invoice ID. And it's just, how much code that would have been before? It's like scary amount of code that would have been involved in doing that. Yeah. But anyway, so that's another totally sweet new thing, that one. All righty. So they were like new. And then there's a few things that have appeared that are enhancements to what's there. And so greatest and least has actually been around a little while now. Has any of you ever looked at that or used it at all? Okay. So where this becomes
Max and min not.
You've got max and min right, but what does max look at? It'll look at like a column or an expression over a whole bunch of rows, right? But what if you've got 5 prices in different columns and you want the lowest price? or the
Oh.
biggest price.
Cascade.
So it looks at the multiple columns.
And everybody goes case when, and then they've just got a 1,000,000 line case statement that works out all the combinations of that. And the more you have, the messier the whole thing becomes, right? And so greatest and least just does that, and so that's
the
it.
greatest one, we need to declare the data frame like from which to which, like.
No, so like here, if I just say select greatest 1, 2.5 to 19, you say that, it just goes, yeah, it's 19, but no, it's cut. And so now what it does though, is it takes the columns, it finds the highest data type that it can cast them all up to and has to be able to cast them all up to it. It ignores any value that's null, like aggregates normally do, and then it finds and returns the highest one based on that. Right.
What if the database is really big one?
Well, see, this is just values across a column. So it doesn't, in fact, it's wickedly fast because you're just dealing with a single row most of the time. And so if you look at null here, and it's just saying, yeah, that's fine. It works with strings, but if I said hello there, anyone, it's going to go, yeah, there's the alphabetically the one, right? But date constants,
It is strings.
yeah, it just looks at that and goes, yeah, that's a string, right? So it does work for dates, but you just got to make sure the things are dates that you're passing into. Then that'll still work, as expected, sort of thing. But if I had multiple columns before, you'd often see this sort of thing. Case when discount price is less than unit price, then return the discount price, else the unit, and of course, if you had 3 or 4 or 5 columns and whatever, that's just horrible, right? But now we can say, give me this and give me the least of these, and that's the value that comes back.
Can you do, like, if I was to sort of say, give me the discount price or the unit price or the discount price times the quantity or the unit price times the quantity, can you do mathematics stuff in there?
Yeah, well, you can have expressions.
Expression you can.
Yeah.
Sort of try to say,
Totally.
have expressions and have it work it out on the expression.
100%, yeah. And so, yeah, that works a treat. And so.
So can you then, if use that in a group by and put a min around that?
Yep.
And so from row A, it's returning the unit price, and from row B, it's returning the sales price.
As long as all the things that are involved are part of the group by, basically no problem. And so anyway, yeah, that's another. And see, this is actually a really good example though too, is that that's in SQL Server 2022, but it's been in Azure SQL database for probably a good year prior to that, right? And so this is one of the things I really love about working with Azure SQL database is you tend to get all of this stuff really early on. Yeah, just went darker back there.
The online audience is actually getting you from 2 angles because there's 2 cameras.
Oh,
So it's actually looking like it actually looks really good.
Okay.
Show the screen.
Like very slick.
So when that one can't see you, that one can. It's kind of good.
String split was a really nice addition to 2016, but it was broken. So there's things where it worked okay, but the most common scenarios, it was not useful. So the problem here is if I said, look, here's a bunch of stuff, the question is, what comes back here? And because it's a table function, there's no natural order to that at all. And worse though, there's nothing where you can order it by. So, I mean, the only thing I could order it by is the value, right, that's coming out, but that might not be what I want at all, right? And so, so what they've added is an ordinal. So I can say now on the end, oh, by the way, I want to know the order the things were in. And so when I do that, I get back an ordinal saying, here's the position that they were in. And of course, I can order by that and do things with that. And so the most common thing is to order by the ordinal. So that would give me the values, back out of here in descending in that case. But the thing that I like most, and this is where I use this all the time, is that I can choose a particular token out of the string. So I can say where ordinal is 3, go and give me brown, instead. And so now I can sort of break a string up, but then go, give me the seventh thing out of there. And we just couldn't do that before. There was nothing to do that.
Curious, in the string split, when you're passing the arguments, is the one there acting as true or is it acting as an integer?
Actually, I can't recall if we hover over this. Let's have a look.
I'm curious. If you
It says int.
int.
Now, why it's not a bit, I don't know, but
So if you
What happens if you make it 10?
change it to 10, does that mean instead
think
of name,
I think it just
one, two,
does-
3, 4, it'd be 10?
no, I think it just does, is this 0 or is it not? Oh no, argument 10's invalid, even worse. So it won't accept 10. Which is, is a little painful, but anyway. But the things that you can't still do, I can't have a blank separator. So, because sometimes I just want all the characters. And there's no way to do that. Wish we could. I can't have multi-character things that I split by. Specs in varchar 1 and so on. So like 2016, a bit of a tick. 2022, much more of a tick. But there's still things that, we just wish it would do, that doesn't currently do. And again, obviously I can do grouping and stuff and things with that too. So that was nice. It's better, it's not quite there. Sorry?
My favourite bit, it will honour what you pass in. If it's Unicode, you'll get Unicode back. If it's
Totally.
ASCII back. Because same customer we've just been working with had written their own split function, which was enforcing it to always be Unicode coming back because of the way they're treating the separator.
Well, this next slide comes in the category of, I'm puzzled that anybody ever asked for this, but there are things in there that are actually quite useful with this. So ever since I've used SQL Server, people used to go, how come there's no trim, right? And so 2017 we got trim, which was good. And so, but now they've extended the syntax for trim, L-trim and R-trim in a number of ways. So the previous usage here, if I said, here's a thing with some spaces and stuff, look, select an N, go with a less than, or greater than, sorry, and then trim the value and so on, just so we can see what comes back. No surprise, it's just trim both ends. What you can do now, though, is you can also say where it's from. And so I can say select trim leading spaces from the value to trim, or trailing, or both. And so you think, well, yeah.
Like L-trim.
Let's rebuild L-trim and R-trim. But what you can do is you can do a series of characters now, and this is cool. So what I can do is say, here are the characters I want you to trim.
Okay.
And so I can have a string that looks like this, and then I can say, go off and nuke the dollars, the asterisks, and the spaces, and just give me the number back. And so on. Now that's
cool.
Cool.
So it's treating it as an array of characters rather than a literal string.
Yes, it's not a literal string, it's an array of characters, which is very similar to what happens in the translate function, I might add, as well, where you can say, here's an array of characters. I want them replaced with this other array.
It's just
spaces,
And of course, if you're really
if we
keen,
just trim, if we just put the decimal as well, so it will be 235. Is it?
which one, sorry?
If we'll just put the decimal.
Oh yeah, if I put the decimal in there, you just get 235. Yeah. Absolutely. This is what I end up doing all the time, which is, I think, well, that's very strange. But anyway, but in Unicode, there are a ton of white space characters. So if I want to get rid of tabs and character terms and line feeds and all the Unicode ones and everything, I can just build a whole string of those now. And then say, go off and trim white space out of this thing that I had, right? That's sweet. Now, do I wish there was a built-in constant for this? Yep. Do I wish we could build our own constants? Yep. And so on. Yeah, not there, but nonetheless, this is nice. I like this. There's also null treatment clauses have now come in. And so this is interesting. And what this is about is that if you've ever used things like first and first value and so on, one of the problems that can come is that if I, let's say, group a bunch of rows or partition by a unit price in this case, and then I say, find me the color of the first one in each group, the problem is, what if that one doesn't have a color? If that's null, then what I might want to say is, give me the first one that actually has a value in that column. That makes sense? And so when you're grouping like that, and so this is what this does. And so what you can now do is you can say first value, ignore nulls. As IntelliSense doesn't quite get it yet, but ignore nulls and over, and then the partition by clause and stuff like that. And that'll find the first one where it's not null, and same with last value and things like that. That's sweet. But sometimes you just got to do that. All right. Now, JSON love. And so this thing, you may have noticed JSON's everywhere, right? So more and more. So it's going to be even more prevalent going forward. So in 2017, they gave us JSON value. So that says, take a piece of JSON, go off and find me this particular path, and then return me a value that's at that point. That's what that does. JSON query says, go into the JSON, pull me out this chunk of the JSON, which is then itself JSON. So it's like, give me a subset of that in some way. Open JSON works like Open XML used to be. So it's take a bunch of JSON, build an in-memory structure, give me back a pointer to it, and then let me navigate around inside that structure. That's what that does. And for JSON got added. And so this says, let me take a query and return the output in JSON instead of just as a set of rows coming back. And so we had that. And so that's all incredibly similar to what was there in the XML data type. And so we had, if you slip the word XML in there for pretty much every one of those things, that's exactly what it does instead. But the difference is we had an XML data type. Now, there was a suggestion that we would probably never get additional data types. They were highly resistant to the idea. And the problem with that is that whenever they add new data types, you've got all the clients, you've got all the things downstream of that have to now know what that means. And that was a problem, being able to update all that. But so they decided not to do that with JSON. And so we just actually had string values. Now, not giving anything away, but I noticed that UC hasn't mentioned the private preview in his blog, so that's become public. There is actually a JSON data type coming, right? But it's not there yet. So things they added. So they added is JSON. And so this says, give me a string at the moment. Eventually would also potentially take something else, but so test if that is actually conformant JSON. And you can also check for specific types. So you can say, is this a JSON value? Is this an array? Is this an object? Is this a scalar value? You can do that sort of test as well. Doesn't check the uniqueness of keys inside JSON. And if you have null coming in, you get null back out. They also have JSON path exists. So this allows you to say, I've got this chunk of JSON. This path I might want a value out of. Does it even exist? And so you can have a thing for that. And so either the path doesn't exist sometimes, or the path exists but the value is null. And so the problem is if I say to the JSON functions, go and get me this value, and it comes back with null, then the problem is I don't know if the path didn't exist or when you got there, the thing was null, right? So So that was a problem. So now we've got the ability to tell the difference by using that function, and again, returns null and null. And so if we look at, yeah, okay. So these ones here. So if I say, here's a value, here's another value. Now the other functions we've had all the time, the like is numeric, is date, things like that. One thing I'd suggest to you, I see people use these all the time. I always suggest to people never to use them, right? And so what's the downside of something like is numeric? Feel? It'll take anything that's any sort of number and come back and go, yeah. Right? But you can't say, is that an integer? Or, we didn't have any of those sorts of things, right? And so since 2012, we've had try cast. And so to me, what I think you should nearly always be using instead is try cast, and then say, look, try and cast this thing as an integer. And if the value is null, then it wasn't an integer. Right. And so to me, this is far better than ever using is numeric or things like that. You try and cast the thing to the data type you want, and then you determine, if it actually cast or not. And then the good thing is if it did cast, you've already got the value. And so, and that even helps with XML, because curiously, one thing we didn't ever get in XML was an is XML function. So that was missing. I don't know why. But the thing is now you can say, try cast something as XML, and it's either XML or it's not. Right? And so that's how you check if something is XML. And so, but in this case, they did give us an is JSON. So with this one, we can now say, color is JSON. No, it's not. See, these ones are null. So this is the incoming value was null. So the answer is null, right? This one, there was a value, but it's not JSON, right? And so on and so on.
That's confusing.
That's a difference. And so you can check for specific JSON types. So I can say, is JSON value? Is it an array? Is it an object? Is it a scalar? And so on. Those things now all work as well. And so these are all objects down here. You can also use this to validate JSON that you're going to store somewhere. So if I say, look, drop table exists, and I say, create me a table of documents, and I've got a document ID, and then I've got nvarchar max, because I don't yet have a JSON data type, what I can do is I can put a constraint in here saying check is JSON document as well. You know what I mean? So you can only then put something in there which is valid JSON. So you can do that. And so even without the data type, and so if I try and insert that, that'll fail that check constraint. Okay. Now this one here is interesting. If I look at this column, there's a column in here that contains JSON, right, inside that. And so I actually built the Wide World Importers database, and I made sure there was stuff in here we could use for this sort of thing. And so there's a bunch of custom fields that can be associated. So languages, various things about a person and so on. If the product manager had his way, I might add the whole table would have just been JSON. But anyway, I won that argument. But so the sort of thing we can do is we can say, go off and give me JSON path exists. Is there an other languages one in there? And so we know, yep, that thing is there. So that's good. Now you can also, it's not coming up on the next slide, but I'll just show you, is there are JSON constructors. So if I say, give me a JSON array, then I get back square bracket, square bracket. If I say, give me a JSON array with those 4 values, 1, 2, 3, 4, no problem. Mixture of data types is cool.
Strings and integers.
And so if I do that, notice 1, 2 in quotes, 3, 4, this is cool.
Yeah.
Right? I like this. If you have stuff that's null, well, the question is it ignored or is it put in there? And so they've given us options where you can say absent on null or null on null as part of that. And so notice if we said null on null, then null appears in here. Right? Otherwise, the default is absent.
Yeah.
So absent will not display anything.
Nothing comes out, yeah. And if I look at query output, so I could say, look, select database ID and give me a JSON array of the details of the different databases on the server. And that works, you know, I get back a chunk of those. So I can build this sort of stuff with a JSON array. I can do an empty object. I get squiggly brackets instead. And so a typical JSON object, name Greg, role consultant, this sort of thing. I get back a chunk of JSON like that. But I can then nest it. So I could say, give me a JSON object with these things, and then the languages give me a JSON array of those things, you know, and so on. Get the idea? So, and then of course, better query output. So if I, in fact, said, look, give me a JSON object with details out of my sys databases table, then you know, here's these. And then, of course, I could wrap the whole thing with a for JSON path, then say, give me, so give me all of those objects. And that'll then give me back. Curiously, notice it comes up with a hyperlink here. So now we don't have an XML, a JSON editor in here yet. That's something I would love. But anyway, that's not there yet.
Version 21.
Data Studio format is used.
Data Studio, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if using Azure Data Studio, it's got that stuff built in. Yeah, I have plenty of things myself for doing it. But also notice
News to me. Is there any indexes coming to?
JSON indexes. Yes, the question has been asked, and I cannot answer the question. You know, but I think the current thinking is probably not overall, because the thing is you can always extract values out of it with, say, computed columns, and then you could index the computed columns. You know what I mean? Like there's ways around it without doing the whole XML index type thing. Yeah. Or for the most common use cases anyway. Yeah.
You're getting sad faces for that.
And so if we...
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Now, notice this one here. So that goes, oh, hang on. So as it can't serialize CLR objects, that one makes me sad that it doesn't just work out of the box. And it's because, you know, obviously this is a funky binary value, but to me, I think when they strike that, they could have just called toString on that, you know, would have actually been a much nicer thing. So if I just say, of course, whenever you have a SQL CLR object, you could just call toString, and I mean, that'll then give me back, you know, the, in this case, well-known text, the points. That's cool. All righty. And so, and of course, as I said, there's more JSON love coming, you know, down the track. And so in the published details about the private preview, which UC did, so you mentioned there's a native JSON data type, so an optimized storage. Azure SQL DB only for the moment, but again, that's, you know, that'll probably end up somewhere else. The JSON functions accept them, but the thing that I wasn't sure about is what happens. We don't have a type option at the moment. Now, in the XML queries, any recollection as to what that's there for? Okay, so when they added for XML in SQL Server 2000, that says, take my query and return it as XML, right? The problem they had is they didn't have an XML data type. So we were actually returning something as a data type that we didn't have the data type. right? So that came back as a string, and no surprise. But then when we had an XML data type, then the question says, if you do a query on a thing, and one of the subqueries is a chunk of XML, I don't want it as a string. I actually want it as XML because we now have an XML data type. So they added an extra parameter called type, curious name, but that says I really mean XML, right? And so even though I said for XML, I actually want XML. And so you could stick this word type on the end. And so we've been after the same thing for the JSONs, because if I don't have a JSON data type at the moment, and then I have nested JSON, I get back a string. But then if there is a JSON data type down the track, the question is, how do I get JSON? Because the way it works is to actually return a string instead. Now, the thing that's interesting with this is that there is a standard in the industry for how to do that, and it's not type. So the question is, do we end up getting type, or do we end up with what's called a returning clause, or like it is in Postgres and stuff? Don't know. And so that stuff's still being discussed. The other ones he mentioned are JSON array aggregates. So we'll be able to run an aggregate across arrays and objects and stuff, which is kind of nice. Yeah. And
Can you join across to JSON?
you can't join. Well, at the moment, they come back as strings, so yes. But I mean, it wouldn't be pretty in terms of what it does. And so, look, the details are published there. And so I've got that sort of link there, and you can go and read the stuff at the moment about what he has published so far. So sort of wait and see. But again, I think it'll be an interesting addition to this. If it ends up the same as XML, though, I would imagine you won't be able to go this column equals that column or same in a join, right? Because if you try and do that today, it comes back and says that you can't do that because the types are not comparable. Is the word that it uses. It's the same as if you try and do a distinct operation on a geometry type or something like that. It just says, no, not going to happen. Now, I mean, there's ways they could have done it, but it's not done. And so, look, the final thing I want to mention is just bit manipulation. Now, this is obviously not for everybody, but they added left shift and right shift and so on. So we can take a numeric value and just shift all the bits left to right. That sort of stuff works. The vacant positions come as 0. And so there's no rotate. So what people want sometimes is a rotate. Whatever you pull out of the top, you push into the bottom, or the other way around, that sort of thing. No option for that yet. And this one, curiously, even though it's going to be insanely less useful and less used than is distinct from and so on, there is a synonym, which is less than, and greater than for left shift and right shift. And yeah, as I said, no rotate. There's also a bit count and get bit and set bit. So if you do have to do bit manipulation, there is now stuff for that. And so that's not the thing that the average person does. But so, for example, if I said 5 is the value and I said, look, left shift 2, it's 20, it's just by 2, this sort of thing. And as I said, the synonym is that's now the new operator. So that does that. But if you said, look, count the bits in 5 as an integer, so it's like 101 at the end, that sort of thing. You're going to get back 2, no surprise. But negative value, that's going to be dependent on the data type, right? I mean, if you think about a minus value, it's kind of like all ones until it gets to the value. And so it's going to totally depend on
How are you starting?
whether it's a 64-bit value or a 32-bit value or whatever it is you're working with. It's going to determine that. So that one's a bit harder to get used to. Another one that's kind of weird here is there's set bit. And so you can say, try and do this. Now, that value's out of range. And so notice it's 0 to 31, which, again, I look at that and go, I kind of get that because people who work with bits normally start things at 0. But every other substring thing in SQL Server works with one-based arrays.
Yep.
Right? And so, yeah, I don't know. You know, they didn't ask me about that one, shall we say? You know? And so, yeah, I can get a bit at that position and so on. So anyway, there's a bunch of bit manipulation. And so, look, I think that brings us pretty much to T-SQL still evolving and still a worthwhile skill. And 2022 and Azure SQL Database have added a whole bunch of neat things. But as I said, Azure SQL DB is the early adopter. So if you want to get to use the things as soon as they become available, you know, that's where it all happens, you know, at the moment. And I look at so many things that are being added to the product at the moment. They're all in Azure SQL DB, you know, which is really interesting. What I haven't mentioned in there is a whole lot of Database stuff that is, you know, you can now call REST interfaces directly out of there. You know, there's all sorts of queuing things. There's a bunch of stuff appearing that would be worthy of another session some other time. But he's got, it's really, really good because he's a dev in his former life sort of thing, and he's in sort of leading a team where they're just adding dev related features at the moment, but the vast majority end up in Azure SQL DB first up. And so anyway, and contact details. So come visit, yeah, and stuff like that. So hopefully of use.
Thanks.
Did anyone have any questions online or in the room? Kind of hard to ask questions when you kind of covered everything really well.
Well, I tried to.
I've got to thank you. Very informative.
Good.
Guessing that was Martin.
Oh, Martin was online?
No. He was just asking if anyone else online had any questions. So, all good.
Terrific. Oh, yeah, as I said,
Anyone
hopefully
typing online, so I'm assuming no.
That's okay.
all of yous.
Probably hang around for a minute or so anyway. But yes, I will wrap up with a thank you to everyone. Just a few things. So not sure if everyone was in the room when we discussed this beforehand. The next month's meeting will be a joint meeting with us and the Power BI group. We've got so the Melbourne Power BI users group or something like that. I've put links in Meetup, like in the chats and stuff, but I'll send them out again as well. So we're trying to manage the registrations through one meetup so that if we max out the room, we know basically. So register through there, but it will be here, actually in the other room, but on a Thursday night next month. So that will replace our April meeting. And then Martin, Guru and I have been sitting down and trying to work out sort of a bit more of a plan for the rest of the year. We definitely want to have a chance for anyone who wants to try speaking to get that opportunity. So we're basically going to have we've done it before where we kind of have a new speaker night where we just do short talks. So if you want to sort of share what you're doing in your job or, you know, talk to other people about something you've achieved or something you've tried, let us know. We can also sit down in the months leading up and sort of help you with some tips for presenting and things like that if you want to go into that space.
You have become a speaker onto your CV.
Oh, yes.
Yourself, Mark.
Very nice skill to have. So that's sort of coming up. There is a Data Saturday in Brisbane coming up. I know that's not as exciting as one coming up in Melbourne, but we are trying for Melbourne. The Brisbane one is in July. So if you want to escape the cold Melbourne rain and have a week up in Brisbane in July,
To be in Brisbane.
it's a good time to sort of take advantage of that. There's also one in Christchurch the week before, I think.
Cool, yeah.
So yeah, your choice. But if you want details,
Finish that runs at Scream, so.
oh yeah, no, it's a fun.
It is a fun event.
Yeah.
So
again,
the Brisbane or the Christchurch or both?
Christchurch, hilarious.
Christchurch is fun.
very encouraging of new speakers.
Yep.
So if you wanted it to be your first big one, it would probably be guaranteed just about to get a slot.
It's pretty supportive. And there's also other groups that do online that are Australian based. There's one tomorrow at lunchtime if you want to learn about KQL. if you want details, just reach out. I can post them all out there, but then you kind of get inundated with things you don't care about. So if you want to, just ping myself or Martin, and we will get you the details and get you sorted out. I think that's about it. I don't think any other questions have popped up. So thank you again, Greg.
Something like we can subscribe to some emails that is there any events we can come?
Join the meetup group.
So each meetup group has, join that meetup group. There's no obligation to attend anything, and then you'll get the notifications when they do online things. So I'll try and post in this one a couple of the ones that do a lot of online sessions. So there's a Brisbane-based.
Yeah, Warwick stuff in Brisbane.
Warwick's is amazing. It's actually technically not Brisbane-based because he only does it online. So you can join from anywhere. But that one's lunchtimes. And then there's an Adelaide one, which is running tomorrow. That's a lunchtime time slot as well. So you just jump on Teams whilst you're eating your lunch and just listen in. And if you're not interested in the topic, you drop off.
Yeah.
But if you're in the meetup, you get all the notifications. So I'll share a couple of those in the chat, in the discussion for tonight's meeting, if you'd like, once I get home. So I think that's about it. Anything else? You obviously know how to reach us. Thank you so much for coming. I know this was a short notice one again, but we're hoping to not do that so much in the future. And I think Martin's just organising a little prize. You need a cup. So for those online, yes, we still do our little door prize. Sort of thank people for coming in person.
The odds are next time.
Come in person.
The odds.
Get pizza and not
The
alcoholic
odds
beer.
are fantastic tonight. A 1 in 4 chance.
Let me guess. Can I put money on who it's going to be? 73.
B73.
Yes.
Yes.
Woo!
Yes.